Hello everyone, this is the Toronto Transit Channel, and today I feel the need to discuss something rather important to the public transit world. Recently, the Port Authority of Allegheny County, the transit agency that runs the transit system in the Pittsburgh metro area, has released its preliminary 25-year vision for the transit expansion in the region. Dubbed NextTransit, the plan proposes the construction of light rail and bus rapid transit along new corridors throughout the region, the upgrading of existing routes, transit centers, and infrastructure, as well as the introduction of additional community service routes. While all these ideas are positive and really deserve funding pending feasibility studies, there were some significant sore thumbs shown throughout the transit plan. Today, we'll be discussing one of those particular sore thumbs. The aspects of the NextTransit plan that should be of concern to transit users are what the Port Authority has dubbed best use studies. The Port Authority plans to, quote, evaluate currently underused or underutilized existing transit assets to determine how or if they should be served by transit. This already doesn't sound great, but the necessary actions include studies to divest, reutilize, as well as convert and repurpose. Existing infrastructure that falls under this category includes the Allentown Light Rail Line, the former Brown Line, the Penn Station Subway Spur, and the Library Light Rail Line. While it is of my opinion that none of these assets should receive any sort of divestment, the mere suggestion of divesting, reutilizing, or repurposing the Library Line is simply an extremely absurd notion to even consider, especially when cities have spent a great deal of time in recent years investing in their public transit networks, even if ridership does not always meet expectations. To summarize Pittsburgh's light rail network, the system is a 26-mile-long, high-floor light rail district made up of 3 interline lines serving 5 distinct segments of track. The portion north of the Monongahela River is free to use and is fully grade separated, acting as a subway. The rest of the network runs along old streetcar and interurban lines through the South Hills Village, Beachview, Overbrook, and Library neighborhoods of the city. The Library branch of this network is the unique portion of the Silver Line, which has 12 unique stations along almost 5 miles of off-street track. The entire Silver Line carries around 4,300 passengers per day pre-pandemic, with over 2,800 of those passengers traveling along the Library branch of the network. This doesn't sound like a lot of users, and that's because by modern light rail standards, it's not. The line sees ridership of about 560 passengers per mile of track. By way of comparison, the only other electrified light rail network in the US that sees fewer passengers than this is Cleveland's RTA light rail network, which sees 255 daily passengers per mile. However, it's worth noting that this is not really a fair comparison. The Library branch, after all, is only a small outer section of a larger network, and many larger systems have similar dead zones in their networks. With such low ridership, coupled with a history of minimal investment along the corridor, one would think that closing a line with such little ridership makes a lot of sense as a whole. However, there's some serious flaws with this train of thought, and any future study that advocates for the line's replacement should be met with much skepticism, because when one digs into the numbers even just a little bit, the idea completely falls apart. Let's start off with the essential question of whether a corridor with 3,000 rides justifies any transit service whatsoever. Such an argument for not servicing a corridor with this many daily users might be the case in dense cores like New York City or San Francisco, where resources could be better used elsewhere.
Got him!
But this is not the case in metropolitan Pittsburgh. Less than a dozen bus branches and only about 4 bus routes in the 96-route Port Authority bus network actually serve more than 3,000 riders per day, and none of these routes do so on a line less than 5 miles in length. Bethel Park and South Park, like the rest of the region, deserve equitable transit services regardless of the mode. This area, by the Port Authority's own standards, has to be served by transit, and we'll see later that the only logical choice for transit is light rail transit. Light rail, you say? But what about the associated capital costs? Well, as I mentioned previously, the line has barely received any state of good repair investment as a light rail line. Back when the system's former network was being modernized and rationalized, with the construction of the downtown subway in the 80s, all portions of the current light rail network were rebuilt to support the rebranded service. All sections of track, with the exception of the Library branch. This is undoubtedly a cost-saving measure, but has also led to a state in which a portion of the line is likely over 70 years old. Relevant track, station, crossing, signaling, accessibility, and electrical infrastructure likely requires extensive rebuilding, to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. Given that the region only poured $100 million into Pittsburgh's last subway expansion, as well as severe underfunding at the state level, the Port Authority is certainly looking to cut its losses on an underperforming, outdated line that was built for an older city. Except, is this really that big of an investment? The line sees close to 3,000 daily users, most of which likely rely on the service for essential travel. Closing this line, disenfranchising its users, and throwing close to an additional 2,000 cars on existing city streets will likely require as much capital funding for additional road and parking requirements between Bethel Park and downtown. Providing additional bus service isn't without its own set of capital costs either. With the current federal government looking to electrify bus networks, a replacement line alone to downtown would likely require a new fleet of approximately 10 electric buses, costing approximately $10 million for vehicles and additional charging infrastructure. New bus stops and layover facilities will also require another $5 to $10 million in capital costs, meaning that the cost requirements for a bus replacement alone would be close to at least $15 million. Closing the library line would also require the demolition and abandonment of the corridor, operator retraining, and other costs associated with conversion. While rebuilding may be a more expensive option when compared to abandonment, there are financial incentives for supporting reconstruction efforts. And with the federal government more open to investment in rail transit, investing $20, $50, hell, even $100 million on retaining an important link can easily be justified, especially when alternatives have their own associated costs. It's easy to argue that the capital cost of new bus transit is significantly less expensive than that of rail transit. This is why we've seen a large rise in bus rapid transit expansion throughout the United States, especially in recent years. However, the operations, maintenance, and overall social costs associated with converting a fully functional light rail line to buses is much harder to argue. Here in Pittsburgh, it turns out that operating the line as is, regardless of the service pattern, is actually far less expensive than running the service with buses, largely because the library branch interlines with an existing rail service to downtown. I won't have time to dive into the methodology of my analysis. You'll be able to see that in an unlisted video in the description below. However, regardless if you do a full route replacement, an optimized route replacement, or a selective replacement, the cost of running a bus service outweighs that of the current service patterns. You may be skeptical of the parameter values I've used. However, all explicit data has been provided by the Department of Transportation for the year 2019. This analysis is based entirely on the data provided by the Port Authority. With this conservative analysis showing that the cost of operation will not improve with any sort of bus service, one must ask why the Port Authority is even considering closing this section of line. And the question to that is what brings us to the crux of this whole cluster of an idea. The intention of the Port Authority is to cut service to Bethel Park and South Park with the intention of shifting cost of transportation to transit users themselves and other city/state departments. The Port Authority knows that any shift to buses will lead to a significant decrease in ridership along the corridor, to the point in which operating a bus service might make financial sense. However, this has significant repercussions for the surrounding environment, community, and the reputation of transit as a whole. Ultimately, the fact of the matter is that despite the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic, including the slow return of rail ridership, transit agencies should not be taking advantage of this catastrophe to justify worsening transit service, especially rail transit service. What's even more despicable is that the Port Authority is attempting to cover up the fact that they plan on rationalizing service by hiding it in an expansion study. The Port Authority is not being transparent with their intentions, and it's only right to call them out for it. Thanks for watching. I just want to address the elephant in the room before I go. Recently, the St. Louis Metrolink review has garnered a lot of attention, with many of you asking where the second part of the video is. I can promise you it's on the way, but it will be quite some time before the video is finished. The script is already written, but unfortunately my bank of stock footage of the network is almost non-existent, and it will be some time before I can return to the US and grab some more stock footage. I have read all your comments on the video and I really appreciate all the positive and constructive feedback the video has received. I will try to remedy any audio issues in all upcoming videos. Originally, this video was actually supposed to be a review of the Pittsburgh light rail system, as I really do think it is one of the most underrated light rail systems in the United States. Alas, this NextTransit plan has kind of screwed with those plans as a whole. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.